Like you're on Nahaz. How's it going, man?
It's going pretty well.
Happy to have you on. Happy to have you on the podcast here.
Yeah, man. Nice to talk to you.
Yeah, I've never talked with you before. I'm newer to this scene, so I,
Yeah,
I, I, I know
I
about
think we
you,
met
but
very briefly at TI. You knew some of the complexity guys from the Han days, but yeah.
yes, yeah. I've never been to TI, so it wouldn't have been there, but
Oh
somewhere.
no, not oh it was what I we've anyway we shook hands at some point, but
I want to
it's
say
good
we
to
have,
finally
yes.
talk to you.
Exactly. No, but I'm happy to have you on. I know that you like to talk a lot of Dota 2 and numbers especially. Of course, seems to be your specialty, but just in general. So I'm happy to have you on to talk about the Dota Pit event that just took place. I assume you watched a fair amount of it or
Yeah,
looked into it.
yeah. I mean, I think it's a shame that when most people talk about the Dota Pit event, that they're probably going to be talking about some of the problems and the negatives because
Yeah.
the Dota, when it was finally played, was terrific. We had great quality matches and a barn burner of a grand finals, went all 5 games. And as you said, EG were able to pull it out there in the end. And I really give the talent and the players a whole lot of credit for delivering what was a great viewer experience during the actual games.
Yeah, no, you and I both have been through those experiences. I'm sure at set events and where you're just grinding it out and going into the AM. And as talent, as talent, it's tough enough. But I can only imagine as players too. People like to. I feel like I've heard this before. It's like, oh, they're just gamers. How tiresome could it really be? They're just
Yeah.
playing a video game. It's a mental. It's draining, man, from game to
It,
game.
Look, it's draining enough. I don't know if this is true for everybody, but at least for me and probably for most people, it's draining enough playing ranked pubs. But I can tell
Yeah.
you, it's a whole new level of pressure and of concentration that these players are under at the LAN events, and it's partly why it's partly what makes LAN events so fun and so special as a spectator. But you really do have to respect what these guys go through. And
Yeah.
unfortunately, we were very lucky to have two battle-hardened teams that had been tested before in these grand finals. And so they were able to keep their focus. One of the things that I talked to some other people about is if Faceless, for example, makes the grand final, are they able to keep up that same quality of Dota through all the delays and through all the
Yeah.
time? That final series lasted 7 hours.
That's ridiculous. 7 hour best of five.
Yep.
Something I was talking about right before I had you come on. I'm actually curious on your opinion on it. It was best of one all the way
Yep.
to the grand finals from the losers.
Right.
I was mentioning, at least the loser bracket finals make that best of three. But what are your thoughts on that, though?
Can I do a very economist thing, and can I answer your question with a question?
Okay, sure.
What would you rather have? Would you rather have that kind of a format, or would you rather have single elimination?
So my suggestion specifically for this event was the losers bracket finals arguably should have been best of three, and then the grand finals best of three. Because again,
Yes,
I get that there's only so much time, but I think that
yes.
could have been better.
I don't think for this particular event, I don't think there's any question that having a best of one lower bracket final into a best of 5 grand final is very silly. I
Yeah,
actually think this is one of the things I had a back and forth with Red Eye over Twitter about that. I think it should actually be in every tournament rules that the tournament admins, if there's a best of 5 final scheduled, that the tournament admins have the right to convert that to a best of 3 if there are scheduling delays prior to that. Because I mean, it's just it really isn't fair to anybody. Like I said, the conditions were such, everybody there that was there as talent and casting really sucked it up. The players were in a position to play some good Dota still, but
yeah.
under slightly different circumstances, I could have seen some really bad things happening.
Yeah, it's such a tough place though, because at the same time, there's a lot more to it than just simply like there's the sponsorships and the marketing of all of it, and they've maybe been hyping up this idea that it's best of 5, yet all of a sudden if you then swap to best of 3, then that can screw over with what they had
Wow.
planned. So I mean,
And it's something too. The irony is that ESL has actually taken some flack for that in the past, having best of 3
yeah,
grand finals. But that's a big part of it. The other thing that bears mentioning with this, that there are a lot of other venues that I've worked at in this business that there would not have been a choice. I mean, they were lucky to be at a venue in Croatia that they were able to carry the event on until 4 a.m. and
true.
finish things up. If we'd have been at Frankfurt, I mean, there are noise ordinances in that part of the city. It's not clear to me that we would have been able to. It's not clear to me that we would have been able to finish the event. Period. And there are a number of other things. By the way, let me actually answer the question that you asked and say I would typically rather see double elimination, even if it means you have to have best of one elimination matches fairly deeply. I think double elimination is just, at least the way these teams play in esports, I think you find out a lot more about a lot more teams. I think that, Knoxville and I had this out a couple of times, and I think for single elimination, you really only learn who the top 4 teams are in a tournament. Whereas I think double elimination it's just much more informative about a team. I mean, you take a team like Newbie is a great example. Okay. Newbie finished bottom 8 at the Boston Major, right? Big disappointment. They were a team that I had top 4 going in easy. They lost to Ad Finum first round. So how do you,
and everyone's happy
how do you
they
really
did.
rank a team like that? Yeah, exactly.
but no, I
wasn't.
Well, I do take back to the Boston Major, though. I actually had my opinions on that as well. And, that's obviously being that major event and kind of a good way to look at what we're talking about here. So that was that single elimination as you're getting at. Now, for me, I do prefer a double elimination in the end. However, if that means even best of ones. But, however, with that specific event, if you're going to have a single elimination, then you need to have the initial phase more drawn out, or like I think it was 4 different groups of 4 teams, and in the first place, those groups it felt like they were somewhat almost randomly selected and put together. It wasn't necessarily a huge. What's up?
This has been a thing for a long time at a lot of these Dota lands, that the group assignments are pretty capricious. And, I guess everybody has their own power rankings. I mean, heck, Valve polls like 50 different people, and we still don't ever agree with the TI group. So I guess it's not, you're never going to find something to please everybody. But I've never understood why tournaments are very averse to, I think, you could go ahead and play a couple of the winners bracket matches at the tail end of the group stage. I mean, you always want to have, and this is something that we learned at TI4, that you always want to have every team that's making a trip to a big land like this, you want to have at least show up on the main stage one time, right? Because some of these teams are coming a long way. But I don't see the harm in playing a couple of winners bracket matches, maybe the first round winners bracket matches, at the tail end of the group stage if you have to conserve time at the venue so that you don't have to do these crazy things like best of one elimination matches.
Mm-hmm. No, I could live with that. I mean, there really is just so many different these style of formats that you can do, but it's been interesting to see how that's gonna what tournaments decide to use when they go into it. So we'll see what the next major's about. I thought I heard something that they already announced that it's going to be a single elimination as well, or no yet?
It's Valve, so they haven't. You're not going to get the details but the dates of the event, unless the format is drastically different, I believe there are only 3-4 days at the venue, so it's the event schedule is the same as the Boston schedule. Yeah. So it's highly, highly suggestive that we're going to have the same format.
All right, well, we'll have plenty of discussions on that as it gets closer, and
is what it is.
We get the information on that. So, but yeah. So, anyways, the Dota Pit event here that we just had. We did have the best of one through the losers bracket, and it was what it was. Now, another question that I brought up real quickly too was, what was more surprising to you, the fact that Faceless got 3rd place and they had their grind, or was it DC getting knocked out despite finishing first at the ESL1 Genting event a couple of weeks ago?
I mean, I think DC may well have been suffering from the same thing that you've seen Newbie suffer from a little bit, and that's just a little bit of land fatigue. I mean, I know Knox ran into I believe it was KP at the airport at the beginning of Genting, and KP's like, "Oh man, this is our 3rd LAN in a month. We're beat," and that's a thing. And especially with all the travel that you're asking these players to go through, DC looked a little bit tired to me. And I also think that we're lucky that a lot of the top teams are just really close right now. You look at EG's knocked on the door of pretty much every tournament that they've been in. OG is obviously a powerhouse, although they, for a team that is in everybody's presumptive top three, they have some questions that they're going to need to answer going into Kiev.
Yeah, no, that's something I've definitely noticed myself. Is joining the scene recently, I've always understood that there's kind of been these top tier teams, and then maybe like the tier 2 and so on. But I really feel like competition, especially even in America as of late, is really starting to step up. There's a lot of teams that are up and coming that are all of a sudden kind of closing that gap more and more. In the European region, we got these qualifiers now announced that I was going to break that down a little bit later on. But, I mean, you look at these qualifying, who the hell's going to come out? I mean, we don't really know. There's no clear victor, in my opinion.
Well, that's partly why I was happy to see the announcement of some of the expanded qualifiers and new formats. It very likely means that there are going to be more qualifier positions available and less automatic bids. And, you go back, I can give you the numbers back through Frankfurt. Qualifying teams have done successful. They've, on a per bid basis, they've done better than invited teams. And it's highly suggestive. There are a lot of good players out there. There have been a lot of good players out there for a very long time. But for the first time, we're seeing the pool of actual tier 1 teams much, much deeper than it has been in years past.
Yeah. So another thing I wanted to bring up here about the Dota pit, and having you on especially, is kind of talking about some specific maybe like hero picks that we saw that, with this new patch 7.0, obviously that's always bringing a lot of interest from event to event, kind of seeing some trends that have taken place.
Sure.
For me, and I assume maybe some other people too, is that not the MVP hero, I guess, but the one that really stood out the most was Lone Druid, right? Lone Druid really kind of surprised a lot of people. What was your thoughts on that?
I think you've seen Lone Druid trending up for a while now in high level pubs, and you have to parse the data pretty carefully. But high level pub data trends do show up in these tournaments, and in particular, my rule is whenever you see a hero whose pick rate and win rate in 5K plus pubs are both spiking at the same time, that's something you really pay attention to. And Lone Druid, his pick rate versus pre 7.0 has doubled in 5K plus pubs, and he's now into the top 15 in win rates overall heroes. So he's a player that a lot of good players are experimenting with, and the talents just help him so much. I mean, he's like a mini sniper. You saw in the very last game, you saw an Ana Ember Spirit remnanting away and still being right clicked by the RTZ Lone Druid. I mean, this is a hero that it's Capitalist called him on Twitter sniper with an escape mechanism. and oh, by the way, a free tanky bear. And that's the other thing Jenkins brought up to me last night was that the bear, in an effort to bring the hero back into the meta, the bear got buffed several times to the point where the bear is viable as a utility spell without items, which is a really, really big deal. It affects the hero's buildup in such a positive way, in much the same way that the Ember Spirit has been helped by his spell damage buffs. That you're not sitting around waiting for your Ember Spirit to get a Battle Fury anymore. You're not sitting around waiting for your Lone Druid to get a Radiance anymore. And that's in this kind of a meta where you want to be fighting and pressuring objectives from a very early stage of the game. It's a huge buff to the hero's utility.
Yeah. What were there any from this event specifically? Was there anything else that stood out to you, maybe when it came to some heroes and stuff?
Well, the biggest thing is not to me that stood out is not the heroes. It's the Radiant side. The Radiant advantage. I tweeted this out a week or so ago that if you look at all heroes across every single hero across every one of the skill brackets from sub 2K to 5K plus, every single hero in every skill bracket has a higher win rate on Radiant than on Dire, and almost all of them by at least 5%. Now, if you look at Dota Pit, obviously small sample size. Before the grand final, Radiant was 17-9. So, not the biggest amount of data. But if you look at some of the other leagues that are going on, if you look at DPL in China, if you look at the Starlighter I-League Season 3 qualifiers, which are going on right now, definitely check those out. Overall, in those two leagues, Radiant has about a 60% win rate in a sample of a little over 300 games. That's starting to be really significant. And I think when you're talking about the fact that you basically nullified Dire's Roche advantage, that most of our brains are wired to there's a reason every side-scrolling game you've ever played scrolls left to right, right? It's a very powerful, it's psychology. It's also, there's the placement of the Radiant Tier 1 towers makes it a little bit easier to TP without being in vision. The shrine placement, I think, is a little bit favoring Radiant on the bottom side of the map, but the long and short of it is Radiant is amassing a pretty huge statistical advantage in these games. And I discussed this with Gods a little bit. It's not clear to me because if you look across the skill brackets, the magnitude of the Radiant advantage declines as MMR goes up. So it's not clear that the Radiant advantage is going to be nearly as relevant for pro games. We're starting to get some data now that suggests that it is, and it may have been masked a little bit because newbie. One of the things that you have to pay attention to if you're breaking down the meta right now is the early game rotations are nowhere near optimized for these teams. Everybody is still figuring out how best to use shrines. There's a very complicated calculus that goes with the interaction between your mid, for example, isn't going to be low when he gets harassed in lane nearly as often because he's got that shrine to go with his bottle crow. But then your roaming supports are going to have more mana to work with. So it's kind of a complicated calculus, and no team has really figured it out. The team that's come closest has probably been Newbie on Dire. Okay, they had for a few games there some very optimized Dire side rotations, and that may have masked a little bit the huge Radiant advantage you'd have otherwise seen.
Well, wasn't there was some with DC in the grand finals against Newbie, wasn't it, where they swapped up their choice of choosing? They chose Dire.
I think they took Dire away from Newbie, and it was very, very obvious that Newbie expected to be given Dire for good reason. They had been giving Dire in the online matches that they played in China because, again, you're seeing Radiant with a pretty big statistical advantage in DPL and other in-house leagues. And so Newbie had put a lot of work into optimizing their Dire side rotations. And when DC took that away from them, Newbie, they kind of looked like every other team still figuring the patch out.
Kind of threw them for a loop there, Very interesting. Yeah. Okay, so that's definitely a little bit something different to look at, perhaps than just simply the heroes that are being picked. But
the heroes. It's tough to say because it's a small sample. You look at Ember Spirit. Ember Spirit's the hero. Of the heroes that were picked frequently, Ember Spirit's a hero that had a very high win rate. Again, I do think that hero is a lot better in this patch. It used to be that in a pro game, like playing Ember Spirit, if you got behind on your Ember Spirit player, you almost had to go into a 4 protect 1 for a while. Whereas now the Ember Spirit has enough spell damage that he can still participate and be active around the map. So that hero is a lot better, but I don't know that we have enough data at the pro level to make really strong conclusions about most of the heroes yet.
One hero that has been a hot topic, and it's been a mix of, we've seen a lot of bans, especially initially, and it's kind of maybe died off on the bans a little bit, but we see picks, and it was pretty significant in this event too. Underlord, a hero that comes to mind. Now, there was one event where
oh my God.
I remember seeing his win percentage was awful, but maybe that was because people just didn't really understand how to play him and use him well, but you sound like you like this hero. There's reasons why. Underlord
is as a strategist, Underlord is a nightmare to prepare for. He is nearly as difficult to, in my opinion, to coach a team to use correctly as he is to prepare for. But when you look at what OG in particular, OG of all the top teams right now is by far the best in terms of their overall macro positioning on the map and putting pressure on threatening the largest area of the map with the smallest amount of resources invested so that they can still get things like farming done. The way that they use Underlord, like they will get multiple heroes with wave clear, and they'll have one lane pushed up to a tower. They'll go take that tower, and then because they had a wave clear advantage, they'll just rift to another lane, and it's like they get a couple free towers a game when they're playing Underlord. And I think as again, the last couple of metas, it's all started with those early game rotations getting locked down and optimized. And once you see that happen, I think you're going to see a lot of teams really start to take advantage of basically Underlord lets you 5-man 2 lanes at once.
It's pretty absurd because that's the thing too. His skill set allows him. Yeah, this push is so strong, and the Pit of Malice is actually a very solid crowd control ability too. It's a very good zoning tool for as you're pushing in. prevents them from ideally, initiating effectively. So, there's reasons why it seems like he is up there and kind of a popular hero, and that showed once again here at the Dota Pit. So, is there a hero that comes to mind, kind of putting you on the spot here, but that
Sure.
maybe hasn't been picked up a lot or banned or whatever, that you're like, why aren't teams maybe trying this out a little bit? Is there anything that does come to mind?
Well, so obviously Lycan isn't in captain's mode.
Yeah.
There is, so I guess if you put me on the spot, I'd probably say Necrophos is starting to look a little bit like the poor man's Omni Knight, where Omni Knight had this like absolutely ridiculous pub win percentage for 6 months. He was the only hero up around 60%, and it was in every skill bracket, and it was stupid. And then all of a sudden pro teams were like, oh yeah, we can pick this hero, and Ice Frog nerfs it. Necrophos has kind of risen to be kind of the new king of pubs. And you wonder if some of the pro teams are going to start to use that hero as well. I don't think he's nearly as obviously unbalanced as Omni was. I still do think that this is a good pushing patch. I still do think that Visage has a place in the metagame. And, as long as Lil exists, you're still going to see that hero.
Yeah.
Earth Spirit is still obviously really good, despite because I said Lil a moment ago, Lil is actually complaining on Twitter that Earth Spirit needs to be fixed. It's like, come on, dude. You really want Ice Frog to buff you even more?
Wait,
so
buff Earth Spirit? No.
No.
That's going to buff certain players,
or
too.
buff Lil personally. Yeah. Let's go ahead and buff like Jerax and Crit and Lil again. And Kaka. That sounds like a good idea.
No, not so much. Yeah, Necro, that's actually a good example. I mean, he does feel like he could be one of those just simply a pub stomp style of heroes, though. And, there are those heroes that don't necessarily translate over to the competitive scene as effectively as others, where in the pub scene, though, they happen to be able to take over games.
Well, but and there's a common denominator, too, to all of them. I mean, if you go down at certainly 3K, but probably even 4 to 5K, there's a reason that all of these, your Omni Knights, your Necrophos, your Treant Protectors, your Underlords, usually built with utility with the mech, pub games, what's the number one thing that happens in your pub games that frustrates the hell out of you? It's you win a fight and everybody goes back to base and everybody goes and farms. Sustain heroes win a lot of pubs because, hey, guys, I'm going to heal everybody up. Let's go hit that tower, please. I'll heal you. And your teammates are like, well, all right, maybe I'll go hit the tower before I do Ancients. I mean, it works, guys. Dota is about towers at every level.
Nothing more frustrating than that. I hear you. I've actually been playing a bit of Necro myself at the 3K range. I just booked the 3K. Got to start somewhere.
Good stuff, man.
Yeah, it's been fun, but yeah, no, I've definitely ran into that many of times where you win a fight and they're all like, I got to farm my next item now. It's like, push objectives. That's how you win games. All right.
It absolutely is. That's the one thing, like, it triggers me so hard in Pub Dota. It's, really winning a fight does not mean that much if you can't convert it into objectives. And that's throughout. It's been so many metas in a row now that there's a conversion stat, right? The teams that are able to turn one fights, that are able to turn Roshans into map control, into a vision advantage. They're the fourth and fifth. They're the third and fourth resource. Everybody talks about golden XP because you see those at the end of the game on the scoreboard. But vision and map control are they're resources in exactly the same sense. You have to plan to accumulate them, and you have to talk about once you've accumulated them, how are you going to leverage them into an advantage?
Yeah. Obviously, Swinnamelons very well from Complexity, and
I do.
One thing I really watched about him or learned from him over the years of guessing with Han and now into the Dota scene is that he is a very, very big proponent of objectives. Objectives is how you win the game. Sounds like we both agree, so. Oh, it seems like my Skype cut out real quickly.
Oh, no, that's
my.
Okay. Sorry, that's my. I had to cough, so I muted my mic. No, there's a reason that EG and other teams are, for example, picking support Leshrac. That's something that in the current patch, at least, the complexity really started. And you have to have heroes that can do tower damage quickly, because in the early game, obviously, respawn times are short, and there's nothing more frustrating than getting a couple of kills in a lane and not being able to do significant damage to that tower.
Yeah.
So that Leshrac with the splitter again, and look at the builds too. Lightning is gone, right? It's all back to Split Earth Maledict. It's back to Split Earth and Edict again, where you are able to win that fight and you're able to do at least half that tower self now.
Yeah, there's one other here, actually, before we start to kind of wrap up here, but Brewmaster, we actually saw make some appearances. Where that felt like that came out of left field, and one that was like, well, does this really work? So, your thoughts on that?
I mean, I think Brewmaster is really, really good potentially when you're OG and when you can run him in the off lane. I think he's a terrible safe lane hero.
Yeah.
But I think the big thing, when they're able to run S4 on his Brewmaster as an offlane, OG is a team, again, going into that map awareness. I mean, Mad does such a good job coaching that team. They're the best coach team in the world right now. They were obviously single elimination tournaments. One of the big things about them is that they favor teams that do scouting and preparation, because, again, you don't get to see that team in action and possibly lose to them and get to bump down to the lower bracket and then have that extra information. And OG they're able to take fights at the right times and in the right places on the map, such that, hey guys, if we win a fight here, we're going to be able to take 2 towers. And that's where the Brewmaster comes into play, that they can pick a lineup that doesn't necessarily look that great in terms of control or disables. But if you're always fighting with Brew's ult up in key places, you have plenty of control and disable just with that one hero.
Yeah.
And so it's great for them. But again, you saw the game where they tried to run no tail on a safe lane Brewmaster, and you just lack damage. The progression just isn't there.
Yeah. I was looking overall. You played 5 games, it looks like, and he only won 2 of those, actually. So
right.
Yeah. Overall, just
and he's a very, very good. I mean, he's one of the better Brew players in the world. Yeah. But you put him up there with Ferrari and a couple of others that are the best that we've seen on the hero, but it's just, it doesn't fit the meta right now. You really do. He gives you that control, but you really do need both spike and sustain damage potential, and Brewmaster just doesn't do that well enough.
Yeah. Well, Nahaz, I want to thank you. Thank you for joining me on this podcast here. Always fun to talk to you. Look forward to more in the future. But are you wearing an EG shirt, by the way?
I am, man. I got it.
Well, Bleeding Blue.
First of all, when Charlie was the manager of EG, he hooked me up. So I will. Come on, I still remember being a PhD student, man. I love my free T-shirts.
Of course, yes.
But I gotta rip my boys today. I was very. I still don't have an OG shirt. I got to fix that. But I was just very proud of those 2 teams. I know the players. I'm very gratified, in particular, to see Crit having so much success as transitioning to the captain's role, which I was sure he was going to be great in. Those OG guys they're an incredible team, a tight-knit group, and they've really built what they have from the ground up. So yeah, I was going to be wearing one of those 2 teams' shirts today.
Awesome. Well, got the EG one on because obviously they won it all. So,
Nahaz,
thanks again, man. Really do appreciate it. Any shout-outs you got before I let you go here?
None that I can think of. Shout out to the Beyond the Summit crew and to Toby that did a great job at Dota Pit under less than ideal circumstances. I still don't understand why it's 2017 and we're at the mercy of servers for major pro lands. That shouldn't be a thing. Unfortunately, the Reborn client broke local lobbies. You can't use that as a solution really at lands anymore. If the game crashes, you lose the whole thing. That needs to be fixed in the worst way, and it needs to be fixed yesterday. Yeah. Other than that, though, great event, and go watch the games if you haven't, because it was some neat Dota, and we got some more in store.
It was, and yeah, we're going to be going over that here shortly as well. But Nahaz, I'm going to let you go. Again, you can find him at Nahaz Dota on Twitter. Definitely check him out, and again, really excited to have you on, perhaps in the future as well. Appreciate talking with you, man.
You too, man.
All right, so there we go. Had Nahaz on, and definitely, as expected, plenty to talk about there, plenty to go over. So